Hi there, this is Peter Reichenbach, and you're listening to the Scene World podcast.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Scene World podcast. My voice is probably very alien to you, although I have been fortunate enough to be a guest in the past. My name is Rick Heaton. Some may know me as Sapience, and I am honored to be guest hosting this edition of the Scene World podcast. I was asked because it is Scene World's 20th anniversary this year. So I'm really excited to learn more about Scene World, more about who these crazy guys are, what they've done over the years, how they got started, and just where they see Scene World going for the next 20 years. So without further ado, I have the honor of starting with Andrew. Why don't you introduce yourself? Let us know what you do at Scene World and how long you've been there, and then we'll just kind of move around the room.
Okay, I'm Andrew Fisher, Merman, and I've been part of People of Liberty and Scene World since it started. I've been the editor, I've been programmer, I do music, I write text. I now help out on the podcast and record videos for the Scene World YouTube channel. I started out before then as a writer on computer magazines in the UK with Commodore Force and Commodore Format. And I'm currently also a writer for Retro Gamer magazine, for Wireframe magazine that looks at gaming in general. And I published a book on Commodore 64 games in 2008. And I'm currently working on a new book on arcade games, which will be out later this year.
Wow, that's excellent. You said you're currently a writer for Retro Gamer?
Yeah.
Do you just cover C64 stuff for them, or just
No. I cover all aspects of retro gaming with them. I've interviewed programmers. I've done making of articles looking behind how games were made, and I do technical articles. I do fun articles. I do cover events and all sorts for retro gamers. So.
Outstanding. Let's move on to our other guest here, our other Scene World employee, Martin. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi there, I'm Martin Amann, handle Altraz, and I'm more the Amiga guy here in this round, and I joined Scene World, I think it was in 2015, I think, yeah. And I work here as an editor and as a composer, doing music and attending a lot of stuff here in Germany with Jörg, because we attend the Gamescom fair here in Cologne every year and do stuff and bringing our stuff to people directly. So that's mainly my thing. And doing retro stuff, I am actually composing music for the Amiga for actual games like Reshoot R. So at the moment I'm sitting here and doing music for Reshoot R Proxima, which will come in August, I think, and that's my stuff.
That's my stuff. Sounds like you've got a lot going on, despite being the new guy, right?
Yeah.
Comparatively speaking. Nice. And he bet me money I would screw this up, so I'm probably about to. But let's have Jörg.
Yes.
Jörg? Okay. All right.
Jörg. Exactly.
Tell us, because you are the OG, right? You started Scene World magazine.
Yes. It started out actually at 1998. When I was 16, I had this idea when I learned that the Driven magazine was dead, that why not making a magazine that would cover NTSC and PAL, Commodore 64 scenes in one magazine. And at this time I was talking with Alex de Vries, who was doing Crystal software in the Netherlands, and I told him if he had any people that would be able to help. So he sent me a fax with a list of people, and on the list of people were Andrew Fisher, and he said, like, Andrew Fisher is a guy, he does everything. He codes, he writes, he does graphics, he does music. So if you want to make a huge project that is crazy and probably impossible to do, ask Andrew. He's very good. And this is how I got to know Andrew. And then I started out talking on the phone with him. And this is how we got together. And basically, him and we started a scene world because he did most of the stuff. I did the brain work. He did the other stuff. And then we had Robin Harper, Macbeth from Canada, who did the Maxes. And then we had other people joining us along the way. And after the planning of 5 months, we finally released the first issue on February 28th. And this is why it says everywhere since 2001, but actually we were founded on November 1st. That is when we got the group of people together.
So founded on November 1st, 2000. That's why 2020 is your 20th anniversary. And then, as with all publications, it takes a few months to put everything together and to get it out the door. So the first publication, the very first issue of Scene World, what was that like putting it together?
Well, putting it together, you mean the content together or from the brain work?
A little bit of both. What was the whole process? Because I'm sure it's changed over 20 years, and you have far better tools now than you did back then.
Well, we used the postal service back in the day. I wrote to friends, and I wrote to Mac from Out of Order, which is a German graphic guy, and I wrote to Toms from Tide on Australia, if the two could make a Max's outfit for a new magazine that would be groundbreaking. And I got both in the post a few weeks later, and we decided for Max design, which we still use nowadays. And interestingly is how I put this is I used MS Paint in Windows 98 second edition. I erased all the writings of Windows, and then I scribbled with the pencil my ideas, like go button, like chapters, text, like a little speaker, and so on to change music. And I sent this crap to the two guys. This is how the thing was.
So you were the first person to do what now we would call dev art for Scene World.
Yes, exactly. And when it came to Macbeth, Robin asking me what text format should we use, because there was no standard for disc magazine. And then I found, okay, in Europe, in the demo scene, we have Voodoo Noter. And Voodoo Noter is a format that all the other noters are using, so we decided for that. And this is how we actually got started. And at that time, 20 years ago, most people would send us the text via discs, so it wasn't a big problem for us. Nowadays, most stuff comes at text files or Word documents via email, and this is actually why Martin organized with a coder a text converter program.
Oh wow! So even though 2000 you started, and the first issue was 2001. Yeah. So the internet and email had existed for a little while. Maybe it wasn't as big as it is now, obviously. Yeah. But let's see, the World Wide Web was around 96, right? So what was the reasoning behind using, mail instead of, just going right into doing web and internet publishing?
Well, that was how people swapped things back then.
Yeah.
So there's the whole swapping scene of pirated games and cracked games. So we just used the same system. There'd be people who are mail traders. Their job was to send out the discs, and we swapped discs to get the magazine done.
I had a dial-up 56K modem, and Andrew had a TV set-top box.
Oh wow!
And he only could write emails of 3 lines, right? Yeah. And later on, he got a keyboard attached to it, so he could write longer emails, but you couldn't attach disk images to the email, right?
No files, no.
Exactly, and this is the reason why we still use the post.
Oh, that makes sense. Then a 3-sentence email that would have taken forever to send an article across. And I'm guessing since you didn't have
it was actually controlled with a TV remote.
That's what I was going to ask. You didn't have a keyboard for a while.
You had to go through the letters one at a time. Press it.
Oh my gosh!
Go back. That's how I was doing email for a while.
Yeah.
Oh, that must have been painful.
I think I got my first email in 2002, and after that, it was another couple of years then before we actually had a computer with internet access at home. So
Yeah.
I was going to the local library to send emails.
Oh wow!
But,
Seriously old school.
But by 1998 in Germany, we got cheap possibilities to call to abroad by a call-by-call number that you would put in front of the country code, and then it would only cost a few cents per minute to make a call. So if I call to Andrew or to my neighbor, it's almost the same price. So rather than writing letters or emails, I spoke to Andrew on the phone every weekly.
Oh, wow! For 5 months to get that first issue out, right?
Almost weekly.
Pretty much
almost
every
weekly.
weekend. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty much every
His
weekend.
parents were like, "Oh, I bet it's Jörg again."
I bet they were like, "Who is this York guy? Why does he keep calling you?" So within the scene right then, I mean, you mentioned, Andrew, that a lot of the reason why you did disc ops is because that was pretty common. For you said the P word and you said it out loud, so I'm going to use it for people who would pirate games. Yeah, that one. So someone who has worked in the software industry, that kind of hair went up on the back of my neck. It's like, are we talking about that out loud?
If you think of the modern demo scene, effectively it evolved from the pirates. The pirates wanted to show off what they could do, so they would add a little intro in front of the game they had cracked that they were spreading, and from that developed into the demo scene where people tried to push the computers further and do more with them. And so what started out as just a little message saying, "Hi, I cracked this," turned into scrolling messages and huge bitmaps and sprite effects and all this. And so it was the start of an art form, really, and that all came from piracy and from swapping discs through the mail.
That makes perfect sense, actually, and it makes perfect sense that you would use a medium and a methodology that group was familiar with, because I imagine they were your most obvious, most immediate audience at the time, right?
This is it. We would have contacts who were swappers, who were within the cracking groups and the demo groups, and their function was purely to copy the disc, put it in an envelope, and ship it around the world. And that's how the word spread. The bulletin board systems existed from the early 80s, and people uploaded to them. But a lot of people then still got their pirated wares, their software on a disk from a mail trader, and that's persisted. There still are people who are swapping on disk.
Really? And you are still publishing on disk? Is there still an option 20 years later?
We can still get it on a physical disk. We still provide the images that can be written to a physical disk.
So a physical C64 disk, you could download it now and write it to.
Yeah,
that's impressive. That's legacy right there. That's being consistent with who you are.
In the early days, and we still provide them. There was a disc cover. We would literally photocopy the disc cover for each issue and spread it with the disc. So then the swapper would make more copies and spread it with his copies of the disc. And so people would have you cut and fold it and stick it together, and a little paper sleeve that the disc would sit in. And we still produce those disc covers for the magazine. They're on the website, and you can download one for each issue.
That's outstanding. And to be clear, we're talking the old school for those who aren't talking 5 1/4 inch disc with a little paper sleeves, right?
Yes. 5 1/4. The Commodore 64. The majority of disc swapping was done on 5 1/4 inch discs, so 170K each side. If you use the disc notcher on a double-sided disc, you could get 340K. And then as we progressed, obviously we started to make bigger and bigger issues with more and more text, and so we went to 2 sides, and you had to flip the disc to get to the second side, and some issues have been 3-4 sides of a 5 1/4 inch disc. we've expanded the system so we can now also publish on a 3.5-inch disc, because there was a format in 64 where you can use 3.5-inch discs, which is 780K. So you see the 4 sides would fit into the 780K.
So that first issue all fit on one side of 178K, right?
Yes, comfortably. Yeah, there was space.
What was the size of the most recent issue, your last issue?
Good question.
4 sides.
I'm guessing it didn't go on a single-sided 5 1/4.
No, it's 2 sides. It's 2 sides, definitely. Yeah.
Most recently, we have published issues that have been 4 sides of this, so would be 2 physical floppy disks.
Would be 2 physicals. Wow, that's actually, when you think about it, when you think about how much just a Word document eats up today, even a short half pager, it's impressive to think how much text, how much information you can actually get on an old 5 1/4.
Well, Jörg mentioned the Voodoo Nota format. So to just walk you through the process of getting the text into an issue, we take the basic file, so whether that's a Voodoo Nota file or a Word document we've converted into Voodoo Nota, which is 2 or 3 steps to get it into the Voodoo Nota format. That's then edited so it's 40 columns to fit on into the magazine system. That file is then crunched into a smaller file, and so that is then decrunched, decompacted when it's loaded into the magazine itself. So that's, so we can squeeze even more on there by using that cruncher.
That's exactly the process, yeah. And since 2 years, with the lead of Martin, we actually have a converter that's getting rid of the first steps that Andrew just mentioned. So you would just load in the text file, and then you would be able to export it in a Voodoo Nota ready file.
So Martin, you're basically taking all of the complexity out of the transfer, or are you just creating complexity behind the scenes so they don't have to deal with it?
No, actually, I'm no coder, but as an editor, I had a lot of as I joined SceneWorld. Actually, they didn't have the issue to have any music or so, but as Jörg and I talked, he just said, "Hey, we have some issues with converting the text," and my first thing was, I don't know, was it 2016? Whole Christmas, I was sitting there in my room and converting text by hand in Voodoo Nota. It was, I don't know if I could say it, it was a real pain in the ass. It was.
I can imagine it would be.
Well, Martin, I've been there for years and converting it before you, so I know what a pain that is.
Andrew, did you just get off my lawn, Martin? Is that what I just heard?
No, you young whippersnapper don't understand what the pain is like. And spacing it out to get it to 40 columns.
Oh yeah. But actually, it had to be. I think it had to be. I had to go through this to imagine how painful all this is, and just as a real one of the younger guys here, I just sat there. I thought, could that be done more easily? And thankfully, we got some. We have some. Good contacts to the demo scene, actually, and so we got in contact to Doc K from Mood Plateau. He's just living 50 kilometers from here, and we met, and he actually said, "Yeah, let's do this and do a web-based solution for converting text in a Voodoo Nota ready format." So and I think now the work. The work is, it's just drag and drop in the end. And so we have to do some, how do you call it? I
like the hand waving. I think that summed it up. Little magic.
just this little work on it. So it's not sitting there 2-3 weeks for converting text. It's just sitting there for some hours and you're done. And actually, I think so we have more times doing better content now. Yeah.
So I'm hoping it takes a lot less than 5 months now to put together an issue, right? You're laughing like, oh, heck no.
Depends.
It depends.
We are getting better.
Yeah.
We are getting better.
20 years down, you're getting better. Always improving. That's the secret, right? We're always finding ways to make it better.
Well, we had one case where we actually released an issue 2 months ahead of time, and that was a surprise to me. It was like, oh, we're already done. Like, okay. But
That's
that
a good
only
thing.
happened once in 20 years.
I should really run Rick through some of the long delays and problems
So
we've had.
I was actually just going to ask what, I'm sure between that first issue and your most recent issue, there are a million stories. What is probably what was the longest delay and why in putting out an issue?
There's 2 really long delays, and I'm involved in both of them. So after the first issue, Jörg mentioned Robin Harbour and Macbeth, who was coding it. He wasn't available to help with the second issue, and all we had was some basic instructions on how to do it. And so the task of putting the second issue together fell to me, and it was a nightmare. I didn't understand how the code worked. I didn't understand how to change the menus so you could see which chapters were actually in the magazine. And at one point, I literally had to resort to poking values into memory to try and change the text that came up in the menus. And so that contributed to a year's delay to the second issue. So it was a year between issue 1 and issue 2. And there were people who were already saying, oh, they're already gone. They've had enough. They've pulled out. And so second issue appears and people think, yeah, that's great. And so over the next 3-4 years, we were doing really well, getting issues out quite regularly, 2-3 issues a year. And then unfortunately, I suffered some major health problems and various other things. And so then there was it 4 years?
5 years. 5 years.
Years.
Yeah.
And
Between issues?
Between issues.
Wow.
And the interesting little story with that next issue is that Jörg actually traveled over from Germany to England, and we assembled the last bits of work were done live at my house, including writing a new editorial to go on. So that issue was sort of a comeback, and
Wow.
And then people from the scene were actually asking us, will this go on? And then we refounded the group.
So it was a year between the first 2 issues, and then a 5-year break. Where did that fit in the timeline? Had you had a few come out, or was that almost immediately after the year?
No, that was issue 15.
Yeah.
Okay, so you had been kind of established, and people were now sort of getting into the groove, and then you fell off the face of the earth for 5 years?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So much so that the boss had to come and sit down next to you and make sure you got it done?
That was actually a surprise. I was sleeping and I was still in my pajamas, and then Andrew was also in his pajamas, and he was surprising me and said, like, while you were sleeping, I actually was preparing something. And then he surprised me. Hey, I got the old hard drive of my rubbish laptop and managed to get an adapter cable and get all the data out of it. And look what I found. I found the folder with all the stuff from Scene World, which is 100% done. We just did a tutorial. Even the intro was already finished. I didn't know that. And they're like, okay. And it was, I guess it was a matter of like 3 hours or so. And then the magazine was... Yeah. And the thing is, Andrew is very modest in his skills. Like, there are better people than me with coding, but Andrew never forgets a thing. He did put this together like it was yesterday, the last issue.
So after 5 years of not touching any of it, it all came right back.
I was pretty much back into the groove. Remembered how to do all the text conversion. Remembered how to label the file names and order the menus, and boom, it's ready.
That is before we had documentation of what we actually are doing.
See, let me see, time frame wise. So for probably like 10 years, there was no documentation on how to actually do the work.
I still have a folder full of paper records of SceneWorld. So it would be a case of planning out what text is going to be in each issue and where, splitting it into chapters. And I'd make notes on, I've converted this file, but I haven't done this to it yet. And I've got all those paper records still. But that was the only record really of how to do it. And Jörg didn't have any of it. So in recent years, we've as Jörg mentioned earlier, we've now got a wiki and we've got a Facebook group, and we communicate those things better.
So now you have kind of like what we call over here the bus policy. If so and so gets hit by a bus, the knowledge is somewhere that okay, good.
Yes, now it's all safe. Yeah, we had a similar case in the recent years when our guy who put together the web version of SceneWorld was missing from the Earth. Our guy from China, and then we had to re-engineer his web work. And this was the key experience for me, where I said, okay, we put a stop to this now. Now we make a wiki, and everybody writes his stuff that he knows into this wiki. And since then, we have a central knowledge base for what we do.
Not trying to cause stress, but that wiki's safe, right? It's not gonna go down. All right, good.
And I think that's quite a cool addition to the SceneWorld website. Thanks to a JavaScript emulator, you can actually run the issue, the DiskMag issues, the Commodore 64 issues, and more recently the Amiga issues, in a web browser. Run through the text almost as if you're running on a real machine.
That's impressive. So there's a real-time emulator on the site, on the SceneWorld site?
Yeah.
That's outstanding.
For the C64 and the Amiga version. And I have to say, those things in SceneWorld, many tasks are like putting off fires. I remember Martin
really... I don't know if this will be a video podcast at some point, but if you weren't watching this, Martin almost fell backwards out of the chair when you said that. I feel he thinks you may have understated it a little bit.
Martin had actually to make a phone call to another guy from us, another Martin, to convince him to not give up on the Amiga emulator for the web.
Yeah. So this issue with not so whatsoever any information in the internet about having the Amiga running in JavaScript on the website, and the programmer who did the JavaScript library actually had no information for us, and Martin and me were working together with Oliver/Six in America, and just started converting the magazine, the Maxis, in an Amiga format, so that just we could use this on the Amiga, but it actually was just a wrapper doing the C64 code on the Amiga. So that's what was not the deal at the end, and so we were sitting there and we were attending I think the last Gamescom fair in Cologne, and we have our hardware standing there, so you can touch the DiskMag, you can have the disc and read the SceneWorld magazine, and I also had my Amigas there, and I did want to have a better solution for the Amiga, so that you could see that Amiga is probably a better system. No, it isn't. But it's the system of my heart, you know. So I had to sit there with my Amigas, and I would show off a little bit, and so I think it was 1 week before the fair we started getting in contact with the programmer of the Amiga emulator.
Yeah.
And started to do all this SysMag stuff 1 week before the fair. Yeah. And I think we finished at
9 p.m. before Gamescom.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
The evening before.
The discs were hot. They were.
I bet.
We were sitting in the Skype group conversation like we do now, like 3 people with the email from Rupert, who is the coder of the Amiga scripted Amiga emulator, and we hacked this thing together like in the very last second.
Yeah.
But in the middle of all the other Gamescom preparations.
Yeah.
Of course.
Of course. Sure.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm very fond of having some other scene guys from the Amiga scene helping us now with the new Maxis. So we get a native system now. Just adding the Voodoo Nota files in and getting some native Amiga stuff there. So we spread our stuff now more on every platform natively. So I think that's very nice after 20 years of doing strong.
Yeah.
I think that's excellent because as I detected, there seems to be a little bit of bias and favoritism depending on whether you're a C64 person or an Amiga person. I detected a little bit of that.
Now we do both. Well, the thing is, I never owned an Amiga. I never touched an Amiga. So I said to the guys, if you want to make an Amiga version, I'm out of it. And then Martin freelanced to take the lead on getting this thing off the ground.
Wow, that's impressive, Martin. One of the things I've noticed in hearing these conversations is, Andrew, I'm guessing you're in the UK, right?
Yes.
Martin and Jörg, you guys are in Germany. I know AJ, who couldn't be with us today, is in the US.
Exactly.
You mentioned you had someone in China that you were working with, someone in Canada. How did that come about? How did this really become a global enterprise? You're a multinational.
I can tell you when we put our homepage up in the year 2001, which I coded myself with Notepad, because I learned homepage programming at that time. We got a guestbook entry from Victor, aka Retromantis from Peru, Lima, and he said like, "Hey guys, you are cool. I want to be in touch." And it went that far that in 2013, in April, I actually went over to Lima and visited him and some scene friends. And it also went that far that last year Victor did a travel to Europe and visited us and spent a week at Gamescom with us.
Wow.
So
impressive.
A lot of team members we got because people asked us how to join. Martin, for example, sent us a Twitter tweet while we were making a Twitch show, a Twitch live show, how to play online via Vice emulator on a C64. And he wrote a tweet saying, "This is crazy, guys. You are crazy. You are doing crazy, incredible stuff. How can I join?"
And how do you feel now that you've joined, Martin? Was this a good call, bad call? And with all the stuff on fire and the hand wavy stuff from before. It's really slow to answer.
Yeah. But in the end, I'm really honored to have the opportunity to join this group because besides all this stuff with doing things in the last second, Jörg and I have a lot of calls during the week, do a lot of tech talk and helping each other. It's being rich with these guys together and have all these stuff. And if you have a question, you can ask. You get help from anywhere, from all over the world. It's actually awesome.
Yeah, and cool. I just want to turn it around and pay tribute to Jörg. He's been the organizer, the beating heart of People of Liberty and Scene World for these 20 years. It was his idea to think globally and get people together, and it worked because I certainly feel that there was a lot more interaction, a lot more cooperation going on. There's so much happening, and Scene World has gone from being a 5 1/4 inch floppy with C64 data on it to being a YouTube channel, a Twitch channel, social media, a website with the emulator versions, and it's Jörg that's made it happen.
But not always exclusively, because, for example, the podcast was the idea of AJ Heller, Division, who is always been a person who is like the good person, always making suggestions to me how I should handle things, and I shouldn't take things too much to my heart, and and he also had this podcast idea. So the Scene World podcast was actually his idea because he found a microphone for $5 in a second-hand store.
It's interesting where inspiration comes from sometimes. But I think to Andrew's point, I don't think that sort of thing happens if at its core the leader is resistant to the ideas of the people he's working with. So I do think, Andrew, I think you have a point. I think without the right leadership, none of this happens, right? Without somebody who says, you know what, that's a good idea, we're going to try it, it doesn't get done.
Well, the more people tell us it's impossible, the more I'm motivated to do it anyways.
Oh, you're one of those kind of people. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, best example. We, as you know, Rick, because we talk a lot. Also, we are at Gamescom in the business area having appointments, and to this day, we are still one of the few, if not the only, retro publication having those appointments. And I remember sitting there at Konami and with other people, influencers from YouTube, and the presentator is asking how many people know about Contra. And all the others were like, I heard the name, but I never played the games before. And Martin and I were the only people in the presentation that actually know the game. So
you're still playing it.
yeah, and actually the latest Contra is not a bad game, but so it's really incredible to be suddenly asked by Gamescom to have a booth and suddenly be invited by Konami to be interviewed and taking part in presentations. It's totally mind-blowing to me. And I remember when we first contacted you back in the day, because you were a PR person. You told me once you were surprised that we are bigger as a project than you thought originally.
Absolutely. I was honestly surprised. So I am of an age where I remember, the C64 and while I did not have one, I had the Enemy. I had an Atari 800.
The other enemy.
The one of the many enemies, I'm sure, that came out of that whole thing. I too remember bulletin boards and downloading and everything else and dial-up. You said you had a 56K. I had a 300 baud modem was my first ever modem.
Yeah, mine too.
Really? See,
yeah.
That's how far. That's why you guys get off our lawn. Me and Andrew are going to go get a pint down the pub. But I do remember that conversation, and I was, and to be honest, I'm still legitimately impressed that this community and this scene really are as big as they are, and I think it's really cool that in the last few years, major developers, major companies have started to recognize that there's actual profitability there. You can look at things like the NES Mini and things like that are kind of stepping in there. There is, I don't know if it's been released in the States now, but I think it was released in Europe, the Mini C64.
Oh, yes, true. Yeah.
So this is all coming back around, but you guys really kind of were way ahead of that wave.
Well,
that's true.
We hadn't given up on the older machines. We were still interested and alert to what was happening. And I think
That's true.
I think Europe particularly has had that a lot longer than the States. I think there's an older generation, so those in their 40s, who are looking back and thinking, oh, I had that NES game growing up, I'd love to play that again. Or they've seen, oh, this latest Metroid game has come out. I remember playing Metroid back in the day, and they look at it from that side of the nostalgia. Whereas I think I can speak for Jörg here as well, because we were back there and played a lot of the old games and still had the old systems around, we were still interested in what was happening. And because of that, there is then this almost a second wave now of interest in the older machines. There are commercial companies making games for the Commodore 64 still. There are commercial companies, as you mentioned, the C64 Mini and the new full-size THG C64, which has a working keyboard, are an example of how it's not necessarily about making money out of it, but it is about capturing that nostalgia and that looking back and thinking, this is where we came from. Look at where we are now. Because as much as I enjoy playing modern games, I still find it much easier to pick up an old game for a few minutes and play it. Something I've played before, I can just get straight into rather than having to learn that L3 and triangle does something.
Right. No, I even 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago now, went back on eBay and hunted down a fully functioning, and I'm going to say the bad word again, Atari 800, complete with the double-sided, double-density disk drive and the cassette drive and a whole bunch of other stuff. And one of the games that I have that I will go back to there is Zaxxon.
Oh yeah.
By Datasoft, right? And in my defense, if you flip the disc over, it's the C64 side. There was a lot of software sold back then that there was one format on one side and one format on the other side. They were very agnostic developers at the time.
Yes, it's interesting. If you look back slightly earlier, sort of the TRS-80, that era, there were companies that were selling one tape with 2 or 3 different versions on. And then, as you say, Datasoft and Mastertronic, who are based in the UK here, they did the flippy disk with Atari and C64 versions on, and they're quite collectible now, those releases, just because of what they represent. A time when all the formats were growing together.
Right, but the original console wars was really C64, Atari, and all of those home computers, those first entries into that space.
Exactly.
But even then you see, I mean, you mentioned Datasoft. Datasoft were more agnostic than most because they produced great games on both Atari and C64. The Juno First, just speaking from a game I've been playing recently, that's an arcade conversion, original Konami game. The same program actually programmed both the C64 and Atari 8-bit versions of that.
Really?
And it's that's sort of interesting. But now I think we're actually going the other way in that we're sort of merging closer together because effectively your PS4s and your Xbox Ones are PCs in a box.
Yeah, they're all NVIDIA, AMD, Intel internals, right? So now they're PCs with really kind of a custom operating system over the top.
Yeah.
You notice here how it goes up the hill. Martin knows a bit about retro. I know a bit more about retro, and Andrew is our expert.
Andrew is Gandalf of this group. I can tell.
He is the famous guy here.
That's very cool.
I've got a friend on Twitter who calls me the Retro Oracle because if he asks the question, it's usually me that answers it.
Yeah. So, but hey, it's a crazy time. I mean, I think Martin remembers last year when we had an appointment at 3D Realms. We shook hands with Scott Miller, who invented the shareware concept, and I have the phone number from the CEO of 3D Realms. And then, I never thought in my life that I would talk to industry heroes like best buddies someday, and would actually make projects together, like being interviewed for the Frankfurt Film Museum at an exhibition,
What was that like?
That was amazing to be suddenly asked to help an exhibition program for the German Film Museum in Frankfurt. That was incredible. And so all those things, I never thought it would happen. So Scene World is a lot more than just a disc magazine. We branched out to do more stuff, sometimes by chance and sometimes because other members had new ideas.
And that's a good thing. I think that's how you guys have managed to go 20 years, right? Is because you were always willing to adapt, change, move forward, explore, new venues, new opportunities. And again, I would personally say that has a lot to do with you.
Screaming at each other or losing nerves.
Losing hard drives for 5 years,
There's an old Yiddish word called chutzpah, and I think Jörg has plenty of that. As you said, he's prepared to go up to someone at Gamescom and ask them for an interview. He's prepared to sit down and find an email to someone. He spent years tracking people down, and that resulted in some great interviews and great features for the magazine, and also obviously for the new ventures, the podcast and the YouTube channel.
I spent 10 years tracking down Chris Crick, which was the sound manager of Epix. 10 years.
10 years to find him.
10 years to find him. 10 years. And so then I spent another year calling him each week till he answered his home phone. So
20 years ago, we didn't have a word for that. Pretty sure we do now.
Yeah.
I don't think it's chutzpah.
Well, this is just me. I'm persisting.
Well, that's actually a good thing because that is why you guys are celebrating your 20th anniversary now, is because you've managed to hold it together and keep it moving. I'm really curious. What about fans? I'm sure you guys have a pretty good fan base, collectively and maybe individually, except Martin. He looks very concerned when I said fans.
Well, I sent you some photos before the interview, where
Martin is very proudly showing off his Scene World T-shirt.
So I sent you some photos before the interview where AJ actually went to exhibitions in New Jersey, and he was asked by fans to sign and give autographs.
Yeah. I saw those. It's kind of where I was going. It's like, do people seek you out? Like when you say we're going to be here, do you have that cadre of fans that come up like they did with AJ, and do you guys get a crowd at your booth at Gamescom?
Probably not because they know us, but because I think it's cool. I think being recognized is more an American thing. Fair. I mean, it happens to AJ sometimes. He's filling up his car and his gas station person says like, "Hey, you should listen to a podcast. I see you are into retro. I think it's called Scene Something."
That's funny.
And then AJ is starting like, "It's a Scene World podcast." And this guy is standing there with open mouth like, "Wow, you are the moderator of this podcast. Oh my God."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And AJ
so
actually hates being recognized.
Does he really?
Yes, he hates
I'm going to have to give AJ grief.
He hates it. So all those photos, all those comments were actually from his girlfriend because she's so proud of him.
And I think she should be. I really do. I do agree. I think it's more of an American thing. That's why I was curious. To know how you guys kind of saw that whole side of things, and whether you did get the screaming fans, even when you're trying to force it a little bit there, Martin, by showing off the T-shirt and saying, "Hey, notice me."
well, we had fans who said Martin is a little cute cuddle bear.
Yeah.
And then
so he has groupies.
Yeah.
And then AJ had to tell her, unfortunately, he's already married and he has kids.
Oh.
Sorry, ladies. Martin's off the market.
So and it actually happens that sometimes we are emailed by press people. So I think it was 3 years ago. Yeah, we had somebody from the third largest smartphone mobile page in Moscow.
And
she emailed us, and she asked if we could help her researching contacts and info about Commodore and the 30th anniversary with Chuck Peddle and so on. I said, like, sure, no problem. I have those people on my Skype contact list. I can put you together, and I did. And actually, she went so far and went to Gamescom with us.
Excellent.
Yeah.
From Russia. That's cool.
On the second evening at Gamescom, we actually went to a Russian restaurant.
In Germany.
In Germany, in Cologne, in the near of Gamescom. And I think Martin was with us, right? Martin, you should remember.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah. And it actually it was also a business lunch with the two key people from 3D Realms.
Yeah.
Frederick Schreiber and Mike Nielsen.
Excellent.
So we had a Russian journalist of one of the biggest sites in Moscow. We had the two key people from 3D Realms and us from the Scene World crew, all sitting in a restaurant on a large table. Yeah, that was.
And 20 years ago, that was never even a thought, was it?
No.
Martin, I'm disappointed you remember it, because that means you did not drink your fill of vodka. So I'm a little disappointed.
No, I drank some Russian beer. So.
Oh, okay. That'll work.
So anyway, so we tried to enjoy the things even after Gamescom was over for that day. And it also slipstreamed a bit into other publications, because, for example, I got in touch after 8 years of searching with Stefano Arnold from Tectoy, and actually it helped Andrew to get an interview with Stefano Arnold after our podcast. I think it was for it was for the annual Plus.
No, it was for Retro Gamer. It just came out in Retro Gamer at the end of last year. And yeah, that was a fascinating interview with Stefano, looking back over 30 years with Tectoy in Brazil. They licensed the Sega hardware, so they produced the Master System and the Mega Drive in Brazil. And in recent years, they then produced new versions of the hardware, just as the sort of the mini console idea was catching on elsewhere. They were ahead of the curve on that, really, and then they produced a portable Master System and their version of the Mega Drive Mini first, before Sega's official one. And so there's some fascinating stories there from Stefano, some of which we'd had covered in the podcast, but which obviously then I was able to put down in print and capture that history for Retro Gamer. And I mean, ironically, then Stefano then sold up his interest in Tectoy and moved on. He's still a consultant to the company, but I think with Seenwell's help, we just captured at that right point, got lots of interesting stories.
Exactly. Actually, before this call here, I had a call with a friend from Brazil. I'm actually planning to go to Brazil this June and meet him in person. That's actually my planning right now. Yeah, he offered me to put me in touch with the new owners of Tectoy and show me a bit about the Mega Drive hardware and so on. So that's actually what I'm planning to do. If COVID-19 does allow me, that's my planning for this year. Yeah.
Yeah, here's hoping on that one. I think we'll be good. So I'm really interested, because we're now talking about systems that are 40 plus years old.
Yeah, well, the Commodore 64 will be 40 in 2022.
Right. So how do you outside of emulators, I'm guessing they're purists, right? The people that actually want to physically own the hardware. How does the community keep that alive? And do you guys do anything to kind of help with that and bring awareness to keeping the old hardware alive?
Well, I think we've all got old hardware between us that we keep running. One of the key things that's helped in recent years has been modern storage methods. So for the Commodore 64, you can get the SD to IEC and the 1541 Ultimate, which allow you to run either an SD card or a USB stick. So you can download the new software straight from the internet as a disk file, put it into one of those devices on the SD card or the USB stick, and run it on the real hardware, which is faster, easier, and and really convenient. So I mean that's helped, I think, in a lot of ways. And there are similar solutions for other machines and the flash cards and that sort of thing for the consoles.
For me, I own the 1541 Ultimate, but I only use it to preserve data sets, so tapes. I still use the original disk drives. And I actually have connected my Commodore to my router with an Ethernet adapter that puts the PC as a slave and the C64 as a master, and then over the 10 megabit Ethernet connection, I transfer the D64 files onto real disks and back if needed. That's what I do.
So it's not just about preserving. Yeah. It's actually about just continually integrating it with modern hardware.
Of course,
yeah.
I actually did an interview with the people who invented that hardware. You
can get a wireless modem for the Commodore 64. You can get you can get on a telnet and things like that. You can we mentioned the C64 Mini. The big advantage of that obviously is it connects straight to an HD television. So that's really useful. Developed out of the 154 Ultimate is the new Ultimate 64 motherboard, which is a replacement for the original motherboard. And again, that has an HD connection. It can actually stream video data and capture video data as well. So there are, as you say, there are modern solutions for keeping the software and keeping the spirit alive.
So there are actually right now people out there that are building new hardware with more advanced tech that maintains that core functionality of the original hardware.
Yeah.
But what most people don't know is that since the beginning we actually supported new hardware where possible. So when in the Czech Republic there were this IDE 64 controller being developed, we were actually the first disk magazine that supported this with a plug-and-play driver. So the way the Maxis works is it detects which hardware is connected to your C64, and if it's figured out, oh, you have an IDE 64, you can run the Maxis from your hard disk or from your 5081. Or NTSC PAL, it will automatically adjust the speed. So that is what is special about Scene World as a disc magazine. And it's funny because I read posts from other people who didn't know, and like, oh, I figured out since the last issue you can run the Scene World magazine from the IDE 64 controller from a hard disk. And I wrote back, you can actually do this since 10 years.
So you guys actually keep the magazine up to date on hardware too, so that it can run on whatever someone may have, or again through the emulator.
Yeah.
So in a sense, you guys are as much a part of the retro preservation community and the current development community, really, for that hardware, because you have to keep your magazine up to date to run on new options and reach those new opportunities.
That is why we have this new member, Ben, who is called Stingray in the Amiga scene, who actually modified the Amiga version of the Maxis to run on modern graphic hardware.
Wow. So you can actually run that on the computer that we all have on our desk in front of us right now.
Well, I didn't mean emulator. I'm not an Amiga expert. I think Martin can explain it better. But there are non-official graphic solutions for the Amiga that wasn't supported originally and now is with the next issue coming forward. But I guess Martin can explain more about that because I'm not an Amiga guy.
Well, actually, there's nothing to explain, but in this, it's just native Amiga formats, and that's the problem, because the Amiga started this thing. What the C64 was one system. The Amiga started out having AGA graphic systems, ECS graphic systems, and well, actually a lot of formats going on there, and we had the problem that the first Maxes just didn't work out on the original hardware as good as we thought. Oh, sorry, it's my cat.
And the cat's name is?
It's a Sammy. Actually.
Sammy? Okay. Another member of the crew. Oh, Sammy's really cute.
One. So,
Sammy is the emotional support.
we have to make Sammy an honorary member now. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. So
now he's going to end up on the masthead. It'll be great.
Yeah. We'll add him to the People of Liberty group page on CSTV.
Yeah. So just to end this, sum it up. We did the Maxis. We did it on the JavaScript thing. We did it on the emulator, and that was fine. But in the community, Stingray just just got the ADF file, got his Amiga fired up, and saw problems there on the real hardware actually. So things that were running on the emulator did not run on the original stuff. So actually we had the support from the scene by itself, because people want to read the magazine on the real hardware.
Very cool. So there are still challenges in creating the magazine and ensuring that it does run on the genuine original.
Yes.
30, 40-year-old hardware.
Yeah.
True. Yeah.
Wow. That's kind of neat to understand that there are still, coding challenges on hardware of that age.
Not only there. For example, we have Kevin Castiles, who is our guy in Canada. He wrote us some years ago, like, your NTSC news chapter is not good enough. You are missing this news, that news, this news. And then I wrote back, if you can do it better, join us. And since then, he's doing the NTSC news chapter, because he can do it better.
Because he's in a territory that uses it, right?
Yeah, but HA is too. But HA is not so
HA
much.
is just about getting recognized by gas station attendants. We know.
Right. Probably that's it. He's so busy writing autographs that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's another interesting aspect of SceneWorld, in that people would say, oh, but you could go on a website and read this, or you could pick up the latest news on a social media outlet. Yes, we use those, but in a way it's sort of harking back to how it was, how the news used to spread. We put out a disc mag, and it captures little moments in the scene, in all the scenes, and says, this is what's happening, this is what's coming up, this is a story, and we're keeping those stories alive by capturing them
and creating new ones.
Yeah.
At the same time, because you're actually, beyond just those stories, you're really, I would argue, central to keeping that community alive, because you're providing them with information. They're providing you with it as well. And to your point, Andrew, that's exactly how it used to work, right? I can remember in the local communities I was in that were kind of that home PC based stuff, and the old Atari communities were the same way. It was always about sharing information back and forth. Even though there may be a central publication, there was always still that sense that that's the outlet, but the inlets were always huge, because there was all this information always coming to you by multiple sources. And what I'm hearing is that's still happening today with SceneWorld.
Yeah. And some years ago, I actually discovered we were mentioned as source in a book about video game history in Singapore by a professor who is a researcher for computer history.
So you guys ended up in the bibliography, I guess, or as a footnote in a research paper in Singapore.
Yeah, exactly. On a book, actually. Yeah.
It was in a book?
It was in a book. In a book published in Singapore by a professor about computer history. Yeah.
Which was the entire point 20 years ago, to make sure you reached that that kind of
No,
level.
we never even thought we would get our own Wikipedia entry.
Really?
I mean,
Yeah.
the whole point was to connect the PAL and NTSC scene
Exactly.
to keep the spirit of the earlier Driven magazine going, which was all about the NTSC scene and was read by a lot of people in the PAL scene as well. And I mean, I myself was part of an earlier effort that had a sort of a similar idea called Universal, which was a disc magazine that was around 1993, 1994.
I didn't know that.
Had chapters from several different countries. So there was a French chapter and an Italian chapter. The group I was in at the time, Ozone, was based in Ireland. So the head of that group there used to write a chapter on Ireland and what's happening in the Irish scene. And I sort of see, that came out. Driven had its international look. And then Scene World sort of carried that idea on and gets input. We've had input from around the world.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
It interests me that, from day one, and even Andrew, based on what you just said, long before day one, Scene World has been evolving with the scene itself, and the scene itself continues to evolve and expand, and it feels like it's reaching more and more people, not less and less, which I think a lot of people would think would be the natural flow of things, right? As things get older, less and less people become involved. But it sounds like you're actually helping to grow the scene.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, 10 years ago, I would have thought an email from Russia, that's probably spam.
Well, 10 years ago, you couldn't find your hard drive. So, and most people, I think would have felt that way about an email from Russia. I agree, 100%. So I guess the question is now, now that you're at this amazing milestone, and you've seen all of this evolution within the community, within the scene world, and within the scene itself, what's next?
Good question.
No, you're supposed to have an answer for that. You're running the show here.
Well, I would like us to be much more known by the public outside of the scene. That would be cool. That's why Martin and I, we were discussing since a month now how we can do more social media network marketing, I would say. So that's at least what I would like to. Right now, our podcast is the most successful media of what we produce, but it would also be good to have the other sources of information we offer also be made more aware by the public.
So you'd like to see Scene World become maybe not more mainstream, but more accessible to and accessed by the mainstream.
Yeah, I would say so.
All right, Andrew, what do you think?
I think from my point of view, I'd like to keep on keeping on, to keep being involved in Scene World to help out where I can. And again, I think it's the stories, the interviews that interest me the most. In that, whoever Jörg manages to track down next, I'll be interested in talking to them, researching them, and helping out with the podcast and doing. I'm gonna buy new games for Commodore 64 as they come out. I'm gonna buy new hardware to use because I'm a Commodore 64 fan. But if I can then create a YouTube video reviewing it and spreading the news about it, if I can record a podcast that keeps someone else interested, and I think that's a good goal in itself, to keep other people interested.
Martin?
Well, for me, it's on the one hand, it's keeping the scene spirit alive, and because being member of Scene World is just a nice starter. If you go to demo scene parties and talk to other people, or if you, as I DJ with my Amigas. Actually, I do stuff with this whole hardware thing, and this is one thing keeping people amazed that all this old hardware is just working, and if they keep in touch with me and come and contact me. So I could say, hey, it's just not just this one thing I do, music or something. There is actually a scene doing all this stuff on diskettes. How do you say discs? Discs, yeah. And for me, as I see my children growing up with all these mobile things and the Xbox, the internet, if they see what I do here, if they come down under here and touch the old hardware and touch the discs and I show them, hey, this is what we did last month, for example, they get big eyes and I can't imagine what it means, what work we are doing here. And so on the one hand, it's the scene. On the other hand, it's just private people like my children to show them it's all living, although it's almost 40 years old. Yeah, that's it. That's it for me. Yeah.
That was not the answer I thought I would hear. That's really great because I think it sums it up so well, right? It's this, you know, I keep reading stats from organizations like the ESA and you know, consumer agencies about how games are really central in the home now. And you know, we carry around more computing power in our pockets, you know, than was used to send man to the moon. And I think it's really cool, Martin, that your point of view with your kids is that, you know, in order to understand where we are, you have to know where we came from.
Yeah.
And that's important. And I think that's really, really cool. I think you guys are a large part of that, actually, in understanding, you know, where a lot of this came from. You know, we've talked about things like things that I bet, you know, your kids, Martin, wouldn't believe. It's like, what's a 300 baud? What does that even mean, right? What is a modem? What is it's just really cool to see that line, and it's not the straightest line in the world, is it? It's kind of an all over the map line from there to here.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean, think about how things changed in the last 20 years or 10 years or 15 years. I mean, for example, Brian Becknell in 2005, he released the book Commodore on the Edge, The Rise and Fall. And before this book, the majority of people believed that the home computer market started off with Apple. And then this book came and people realized, wow, Commodore actually sold the most millions, you know. And before that, even when you did studies in Germany about computer history at the universities, they would tell you, oh, the home computer market started off with the Apple computers, which isn't true. It was actually Commodore, you know, the PET, the Kim 1, all those machines. But people weren't aware until somebody came, like Brian Becknell, released this book, traveled all over USA. And I feel like this is what we did with Scene World too. Because when I started with Scene World with the idea, people told me, oh, there's no activity left in Canada or USA. Why would you even bother trying, you know? And it changed because now NTSC fixing is suddenly something that you would expect from a new commercial Z64 game. So now you buy a new game from Protovision, Out of Order, or any of those other publishers, and suddenly, like, of course we have an NTSC version too. And when we started with Scene World, Andrew had to actually learn how to NTSC fix stuff because nobody was willing to do it for us.
Poor Andrew.
Yeah.
Well, but I think that's in keeping with you know the larger scene itself, right? Is everybody kind of pulls together to figure out how to get it done so that the rest of the community can experience and enjoy everything.
I think I remember, Andrew, you got taught by Dustin Chambers, Fuzz from Canada, how to actually NTSC fix your own code, right?
Yep.
Wait. We have a coder debugging his own code. This is bad.
Well, you see, I mean, when I first started learning to program, I learned to program on a PAL machine, and that was it. You know, I wasn't expecting my code to end up in America or somewhere else. So I learned that, and
Wow.
but I think that's another part of it as well. There's this sort of learning thing. If you go through life and don't learn something new, are you really living? Are you really growing? And I mean, I've learned so much from being part of Scene World, and I've learned. I wouldn't say I've learned life lessons from it, but it's certainly been a big part of my life.
I thought we were going to get a really good mushy quote there for a second.
Let's
try to get over the finish line.
I thought we were going to get it was just going to be like the quote on every channel. Tomorrow I was just going to see all of Scene World's channels were just going to be this, mushy quote - Andrew.
Well, maybe AJ once suggested we make a quote for the podcast, like we make people speak English, because the number one reasons for guests to not come on the podcast is my English is too bad.
Yeah.
And in the end, we never had a problem.
I think people always underestimate, especially non-native speakers. They always think their English is really bad. I mean, Andrew's English is horrible. I can barely understand him. but you guys are great. I do find, and I feel it's a self-criticism as well as I'm about to throw my country under the bus. I do find, in general, Europeans speak far better English than Americans speak literally any other language, including English, by far.
That depends.
I can remember age 13, 14 being on holiday one summer, and I met two young Dutch boys who were on a camping trip, and we were talking about the Commodore 64, of course, and their English was brilliant. I mean, at school I was learning French, and I learned German, which was very vital in communicating with Jörg, and the best bit though was I struggled to interpret a joke from a computer magazine from SAP 64. It was talking about a game called Last Ninja 2, and the joke was perhaps they should have called the first one the penultimate ninja. And although they could speak great English and understand me, they couldn't understand that joke because it relies on knowing
right
the word. It relies on knowing the word and how it means, and why that's a subtle sarcastic joke in English that might not work in another language.
Yeah, exactly. And do you guys find you run into that? I'm assuming Scene World is available in multiple languages, or is it just English?
Just English.
Even the printed version?
Just English.
Yeah, the text we put out the text in English. Yeah. So
do you find sometimes that issue crops up where someone may not fully understand because they're reading in their non-native language?
I don't think so.
Or do you just not let Andrew make really bad British jokes?
No, I just feel like Scene World shouldn't exclude somebody. So if we offer another language or something, it wouldn't force the people to talk to us in a way that would make them understand all over the world. For example, I had the cases where I did 2 interviews that were in German, but then I hired a group of people at Fiverr to translate and to voice over in English. So I made sure that there was a proper English version, spoken by professional voiceover artists.
Wow. That's a level of dedication that I don't think most people would expect.
Yeah, I actually got praise for that. Like, wow, guys, I never expected you would invest so much time and effort into making a proper English version.
That is impressive. That I think that speaks to the commitment you guys all have to make sure that all of the information that you pulled together is available to as broad a a group of people as possible. I think that's really impressive.
Thank you. Yeah.
That's so cool. So I know we talked about on the kind of the what's next, but literally what's next? What's the next issue?
Well, right now we are thinking about who to interview at Gamescom. We are discussing on when to release Zine World 30, the next Discmag issues. I actually got sent by AJ the next podcast to edit, so we always have something running. Andrew is working on the next video, so we always have something in the works. There's never stop.
You have another milestone coming up then, the 30th issue.
That's true. Yeah.
Gonna do special things for that too? Maybe a special article?
Think about this. Well, there will be the next.
Okay, so now I'm a consultant.
There will be the next release of World Music, which was an idea of Andrew to make a music collection with all the music we had from the past issues, and we do this every couple of years. And our Peruvian member Victor made the logo for it, so that will be coming next. That means our next issue will be 3 disc sides instead of 2, because it's part of the next Zine World. As you asked earlier, how many disc sides we are planning to do for the next issue? 3!
3. So breaking news.
Yeah, exactly.
An XL version of Zine World is coming.
Exactly.
Extra large, 3 discs, 3 sides.
Exactly. Yeah, and as Andrew said earlier, the largest one was 4 disc sides. Yeah.
So not totally crazy, but creeping back up towards the supersizing of the mag. That's cool.
Exactly, yeah. And I have to give credits to that to Martin, because when he came to the group, he became kind of the helping co-organizer, because before everything that was happening here in Germany, I managed myself, and now he's kind of helping to get things done. That's quite nice. So thanks, Martin.
So that was kind of praise, because you're kind of helping. Okay. We all know the cat's doing all the work.
So Martin is bigger than he looks.
What?
I mean, in his responsibility. In his responsibility and participation in regards.
Okay. I mean, he didn't look that small to me. That's all I'm saying.
I didn't say boulder.
Oh my.
I see edits in our future.
There might be an edit there. For the big couple there.
There's a couple.
One of the things is we have a lot of fun at Zine World. I remember when we did our second interview with Stefano Arnold, we had this situation where I thought, oh boy, Andrew was asking Stefano Arnold, so you made this limited edition Mega Drive, which is a Genesis in USA, by the way, and he asked him, so there is this light gun. Can you tell me which light guns are compatible with your new device? And I was like, oh boy. And I said like, okay, you don't have to. And Stefano said, no, I will call the engineer department and ask. And he really did. Live during the interview, he called the engineering department of Tectoy and asked the engineer if they put into support for the light guns of the Mega Drive. That was
did they?
Well,
one of them was. One of them was. The Menacer light gun was compatible with the Mini, so
that's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So I was like, oh my god, no.
Calling people on the car.
I left it in. I didn't edit it out, so it's in the podcast release.
When we were planning that, Jörg asked me to do research, and I sent him a file with some ideas for questions and the research I'd done. He said, "Wow, this is great. This is professional." And I thought, well, that's what I do.
The thing about the podcast is, I do a bit of research. AJ is asking the layman questions, and this is how we get along. but Andrew didn't have AJ didn't have time for this interview, so I asked Andrew to step in. And I know Andrew and Stefano, they are both veterans and they both know a lot. Though they were nerding out about the game stories, and I was like, okay, I'm not needed here. You can do the interview alone. I was thinking that.
So I'll stop talking to you, and Andrew and I will just have a chat. It'll be great.
So that was Andrew is absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
Do you agree, Andrew? No, wait a minute. Did you just shake your head, Martin? Martin just shook his head.
No, it's just this feeling. I don't know the English word for it. It's all the praising here. It's
a love fest.
Yeah. That's all I wanted to state.
Yeah.
It's a little love fest.
Yeah.
They are actually planning a successor of the Love Parade, which Germany is famous for. You know, this techno rave party that was unfortunately stopped a while ago because of an accident. But they are actually announcing this year they are planning for a successor party. So maybe there will be another love party in Germany.
And Andrew can go and not Andrew, Martin, you can go and you can DJ.
Yeah. On the Amiga.
On your Amigas.
In the streets of Germany, yeah.
There you go.
Right. Yeah.
Retro love.
Yeah. So anyway, this scene world idea was always for me like handle everybody equal, lets people connect to each other, get the scattered parts of the demo scene all together or not demo scene. For example, the reason why Scene World has a mouse support is actually because at that time there were a lot of GeoS users in America, and I wanted to pull them over to read the magazine as well.
So America is exclusively responsible for there being mouse support in Scene World.
I guess so, yeah.
I'm just looking for a bump for the USA, that's all.
Yeah, and actually the design idea of the Maxis to have buttons and so on were coming from a Czech disc magazine from the Czech group Anubis, and the magazine was called Modskit, but they never actually made a second issue. So I picked up this idea of having a graphical user interface, and I said like, hey, I can use my Windows 98 and make something similar with it. And this is how we came to be. Yeah.
And this is how Microsoft Paint became famous.
now
I remember you said that was how you originally designed the layout, right? It was in MS Paint.
Exactly, yeah. That's all I had. That was before there was Photoshop or something. And even to this day, I'm not an art person. You know. So
the lesson there is MS Paint won't make you an artist.
No. But we have good artists
who
can make something out of crap. So
that's outstanding. You know, every time you guys share your stories, it always comes back around to, you know, it really is collaborative. Both, you know, the three of you and AJ and everyone else you've named, but also the community itself. And I think that portends so many great things for you guys. Yeah. You know, not just over the last 20 years, but for the next 20 years.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, we have Richard Bayless, who is very much known for making games with TND, which is his group. And since our NTSC fixing guy announced there's a break and he won't be fixing our intros, he said like, hey, I got an Ultimate and I just switched it to NTSC. I will learn to fix my stuff myself for this issue. So, hey, good. Problem solved. So a lot of work for Scene World is how to solve problems.
Both within the community and apparently within Scene World itself.
Yeah. Reverse engineering, finding stuff out, documenting it. That's a lot of work. Yeah.
I can imagine. It takes a tremendous amount of dedication to continue, you know, anything for 5 years, never mind 20 years. And never mind that we're talking about, you know, something that's so reliant on external forces and, you know, the inevitable aging of, you know, physical hardware, which no one can control, and the way to continually find workarounds to make everything keep going forward. It's really impressive. It takes a tremendous amount of dedication.
Well, ask Martin how much time we needed to get this scripted emulator thing running. How many emails we sent between Austria and Germany? Oh my God.
Yeah.
But you guys didn't give up. That's kind of my point. It's like time and the realities of the space. You know, one would think that, as so many clearly have before, there would just come a point where it's, you know, I don't know what the point of doing this is anymore, right? But you guys are obviously such big fans of the C64 and Amiga that just the three of you on this podcast today, it's like, well, as long as they're here, there's always going to be somebody telling the story.
I had a few moments of I feel like giving up, and then Martin were like, come on, we will get this done. You know, I will do this and that, and ask this and that person, and in 2 days we meet again, and then we resolve this issue. And okay. So sometimes even I'm losing my nerves and my hopes, you know. And if Martin isn't the one, then AJ is the one who says like, keep calm, you know. We will find a way. But I had a few moments where I thought like, okay, I better give up. But then I thought like, okay, we have the appointments at Gamescom. We have a next issue. I'm actually in touch with archive.org to preserve some videos from a famous journalist in Germany who did computer shows on television. I never thought I would have a discussion about that with archive.org, you know, the Internet Archive. Oh my God. So if we stop, all this would fall apart, and I feel kind of we are responsible to keep preserving the stuff and get the stories heard, you know. I mean, a lot of people I interviewed, a lot of tech pioneers, they were 88 when I interviewed them. Wow. Or just recently, Chuck Peddle, who unfortunately died. If I hadn't interviewed him, it would have been a big loss for us, I think. I mean, we did an over 3 hours interview, the longest he has ever done.
That's outstanding. And like you said, had that not happened, I can't imagine just the knowledge and the stories and
exactly
the history that would have just ceased to exist, you know, when he passed.
Yeah.
So you guys are really just, you're a lot more than, you know, maybe people listening think of Scene World as like, it's that, you know, it's that magazine I read that keeps me up to date on what's still going on in the scene. And actually, you guys have become archivists and historians and, you know, keepers of the history, really. You know?
I think that is a real issue for not just the home computer industry, the software industry in general. I think we're now at a point where more effort, because unfortunately the media itself is starting to break down. You hear disk rot and even CD-ROMs that we thought would last forever are starting to break down or weren't a very high quality. So you know, you need to work out how to keep that, because in a few years' time, someone is going to look back and say, well, where did that game come from? What was happening? What was the design idea? Because if you look back, you can also look forward. You can take an idea that's been done in the past and perhaps hasn't been revisited for years and think, oh, maybe if we explore how this game works, we can come up with a new idea. We can come up with something interesting. And if you look back at the efforts to preserve early cinema, there are people who, you know, are dedicating their life to find films that are missing from the big archives. There's, in the UK, this seems extraordinary now, but the British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC, routinely wiped films and videotapes of programs they produced. And so it's up to the person who recorded it at home, or even in some cases they found recently an episode of Doctor Who, the science fiction series. They found that at a TV station in Nigeria. They found a copy of it. And so I think the games industry is now at a point where it needs to take that seriously. I know there are efforts, the Video Game History Foundation. Here in the UK, we've got the Museum of Computing History, and there's a new organisation set up to do it. But in some small way, we are playing a part in that. We are capturing that history now.
And what I'm also trying is to interview people that haven't been interviewed in English before. For example, Yesh Tarakura, the former head of Commodore Japan, he speaks English fluently, but before I did it, nobody interviewed him in video, in Skype. And I actually went to Tokyo 3 years ago, and I spent time with him. And so I actually learned during this trip a lot more about Commodore and the video game history, computer history. So I actually am also traveling abroad and meeting people in person and interviewing people. And there's a lot of misconception and misinformation that really disturbs me. For example, a few years ago, I've learned that the Finnish inventor of SMS died. Well, I was like, wait a second, that's totally bogus. The inventor was German, Friedhelm Hillebrand. So I emailed Friedhelm Hillebrand and I said like, hey, I've read you died, but of course you aren't Finnish, you are German, you are alive. Can I interview you in English in Skype video? And we did. And it was the first English and the only English video interview he ever did. And I asked him, why didn't nobody else interview you in English? He said, I don't know. I spoke English all my time because he was working for German Telecom, and his job in the early 80s was to find a way to make cheap communication between the world globally. And then he found out there is a gap in the transmission of the telephone signal, and you can use that gap to transmit text. And this is how SMS was invented. But nobody outside of Germany ever asked, how did SMS happen to be? Because everybody just thinks about WhatsApp and so on.
Right.
And then I had this idea, let's do this interview. And to this day, those two interviews are exclusively at SceneWorld. Just an example.
Yeah, and they're perfect examples of what I said earlier. I mean, you guys have become, in many ways, archivists and historians. You know, you're fact checking, what's out there and correcting the misinformation, and preserving it for future generations. I think that's absolutely amazing. I mean, to Martin's point, this is stuff that maybe 20 years from now, your kids look at and say, my dad had a part in that. He's the one that worked on SceneWorld, back when they were preserving this information. And if it hadn't been for his efforts and their efforts, maybe we wouldn't still remember this. That's a big responsibility, guys. Not to freak you out.
Netflix, give us a contract, please. For a new series.
It's funny. I was just about to say I've watched some computing documentaries on Netflix, and I do find it interesting that there's always this. Everybody talks to Nolan Bushnell, right? Everybody wants to, because he's the father, and he's really not. And what I find interesting is very often he'll admit to it, right? He will confess that it didn't start with me; it started here. I'm just the guy that managed to put it forward. Right. Yeah. And get it all the attention. And I think there are an awful lot of people that fall in the cracks and kind of get overshadowed by a Nolan Bushnell within their space. And it's important to kind of pull those people back out into the light and say, hey, no, like you were just saying, Jörg, that this is the person and we should hear from them.
And this is why I interviewed Ralph Baer, just to draw the line with Nolan Bushnell. And he was 91 at this time, and this was the longest interview he's ever given, exactly 1 hour. And a few weeks later, after releasing the interview, he unfortunately died. So Ralph Baer, our interview is the last and the longest interview he's ever given. And of course, Nolan Bushnell also has a mention in there.
In that interview. So he mentioned
that interview, yes. And of course, after that, I also interviewed Nolan Bushnell to get his side of the story. So I always try to connect the dots, you know.
And I think that's oftentimes, you know, especially as Andrew was saying, within this space, within the computer industry and the games industry and the pieces of information that are being lost, but the context is being lost as well, right? So yeah. I think to your point with connecting the dots, that's as vital, if not potentially more vital than the other things that we've been talking about, where if there is no context, does it matter, right? If I can't understand the context of what's happened so that I can understand what's likely to happen, having all this information is just information at that point, right? But that's a huge service, you know, to the scene to provide that context and help people understand what it is that they're looking at and hearing and learning really from you guys.
And that's also a big problem for nowadays publishers and coders. For example, Martin and I, we did an interview at EA about Need for Speed, and I did an interview with one of the core developers, and I asked, okay, now this is the new Need for Speed Payback. What's in it for the people who played the first part in the series, Need for Speed at 1995, and he started like you know. So he wasn't really expecting this retro related question. And Martin mentioned it once when we did the Gamescom special. I'm always the only person in the room at press conferences asking retro related questions to successors of game series that even coders don't know because they were too young to know.
I don't want to be in that room.
Yeah.
But even that's good, right? You know, kind of reminding the people who are now the caretakers of that, you know, IP or of that game or whatever.
Yeah.
That hey, you know, there are people that remember, so there's an expectation there.
Yeah,
right?
and sometimes there are even positive examples. For example, when we did the interview with the new Larry game 2 years ago, and I looked at the animation, I was like, oh, there's some frames missing. And the coders are like 21 that took over the IP and said, no, we intended it to be like that. That's not frame missing. That's retro animation for the new game. And they actually did the research, and they knew about all the history of the battle between Lucasfilm Games, LucasArts, and Sierra, and so on. Mm-hmm. And this is interesting that they really went so far when they got the license and the contract to make the new successor. They actually learned about the history of the company and what was the war between the two companies at that time. And that is what a lot of developers don't do, but they did it.
Right.
And we are talking about people who are 21, so long before they were born. And actually, in the comment section of this YouTube video, there were people saying like, wow, those people really deserve to push the series forward. They really did a lot of research about the history of the game. So half of the interview is nerding about the history of Sierra and the fight between Lucasfilm Games with people who were never been around in the 80s. So that's so there are also positive examples.
That's definitely, and
are going backwards and researching before working on something.
And that's great, because that's showing that, you know, you can honor the past while still making something very modern and timely.
Yeah.
I think that's important. You know, again, to Andrew's point, you have to know where you came from to do the next thing and understand what does and doesn't work. To, you know, you were talking about the different types of storage mediums. You go back to a 5 1/4 disc. It effectively is, you know, audio tape. It's the same technology. It's magnetic technology, right? And we learned that, hey, that degrades, that wears, there's a cost every time you run that disk, right? That you're going to degrade some percentage of that, and at some point between a combination of use and friction and humidity in your environment, that medium will fail. So what was the next thing? And I think as we go forward, as we start looking at more and more types of storage technology, we have to have that reference. Why are compact disks failing now? Let's learn why. What is it inherently in certain materials that may cause our next storage medium to fail far sooner than we thought? And if you don't have a point of reference, you can't do that. And I think, Scene World really kind of helps further that conversation, because you guys do have that conversation still, right?
Yeah.
You guys, we were talking earlier. How do we make the hardware survive? How do we make the disks survive? How do we keep it alive, if only at some point in the far distant future, as a reference guide for the people that come after all of you?
And it's amazing to have archive.org, who are professional in this, having interviewed them and now having them as a partner in crime. It's totally amazing,
I think it's recognition of what we've been talking about the last 10 or 15 minutes, and the importance of the history and the importance of you guys in the context of that history.
More the last 15 minutes instead of 15 minutes, but
fair point.
Yeah, well, maybe you ask what's coming next. Maybe we do the Scene World tape magazine next.
There you go. Great. That's it. Release the podcast on cassette. Is that going to be the next big thing?
Well, the numbers.
I was a joke, Martin. Don't go there.
It is not. Actually, releasing music on vinyl and tape is such a big thing at the moment.
It is.
Yeah.
So why not?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was watching something the other day where they were talking about VHS is coming back. I'm like, no,
But
don't.
well, the difference between tape and so on, they were good quality tapes about audio, but they weren't good quality VHS tapes.
Correct. They were all super cheap.
Yeah.
They were very
Unfortunately.
low.
And the technology was so crude, even back in the day.
We just mentioned vinyl. I was quite lucky last year. Some of my Commodore 64 music has actually been featured on a vinyl EP.
Really?
So there's a group called Chaos Generator, who from Holland, who are making electronic music inspired by the Commodore 64 SID chip. And as part of their Kickstarter campaign, they wanted to make a little game to give away. And so I wrote the music for the game, which is also called Chaos Generator. And they added a 10-inch vinyl EP as a perk to the Kickstarter campaign. And so on side A is music by Jason Page, who's a professional composer and worked on games for the Commodore 64 and Amiga. And on side B is the soundtrack from Chaos Generator by me. So
now I got to go support the Kickstarter and send it to you and get it signed. That's the thing that needs to happen.
you can go on Kickstarter right now, search for the Hessian soundtrack, and the vinyl EP is available as a perk on that as well. So you can track that down.
Nice. Yeah, Lasse Ernie, a good guy from Finland, who actually helped us getting a IAQ fast loader for the magazine.
Very cool.
Yeah.
It's so intertwined and interrelated. It really is amazing.
And the thing is, what most people don't know, the disk routine is actually also combined by a drawing routine for the graphical user interface, and it's called Mr. Mouse, and it was originally used for Lodestar, but was also available separately. And I actually did a phone call to Lee Nowak, who is the programmer of this little thing, this environment, and I asked him for permission to use it in a new project called Scene World, and he gave us the permission. So that's also important for me. We never just used something and didn't ask for it. So people were thinking we are totally crazy at that time. I remember that back and forth, people were telling me, "What? You are wanting to do this? What? In what kind of thing? In a disc magazine with plug and play?
In 2000.
In 2000,
In 2000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here we are,
Which-
20 years later.
Yeah.
I'm sure at the time it just seemed so incredibly archaic to people who were
Yeah.
watching the future just evolve so quickly.
Well,
Right.
not you asked about recognition. Actually, a week after release the first issue, Bavarian 3, a German radio station, called my mother while I was at education and said, "Hey, the radio called. They want to interview you about this new disc magazine you are making." I'm like, "You are joking." No, I'm not. And and actually 5 years ago, I actually had a German film, not a German TV crew here, a journalist with the film crew and so on, and they did an interview for breakfast television and for the night news about retro and the new NAS Mini, because I helped doing research about that, and so I became famous in my city. You know,
See,
the doctors.
see, I knew we were going to get to a story where it's not
Yeah.
just AJ.
So when this late news snippet on the television was reused for breakfast television a month later, and I came to work next day, they were like, I had my breakfast and it was almost falling out of my face when I saw you on television.
So your coworkers had no idea that what you did had become so popular, right?
No. And when I was at my GP a week later, he said, like, "I heard you are our most famous patient now."
Great. Now they're going to raise your rates. Oh no, that's an American thing. Sorry.
Yeah. So Well, no. Here in Europe we officially have health insurance. Fortunately. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. That is one of those stories where I got recognized.
That's great. See, AJ, it's not all about you.
Yeah.
No.
See what happens when you don't show up? People talk.
Well, I try not to miss out anybody, you know.
Yeah.
And yeah. So there are a lot of more staff members we have, like Gary from China, who did all this interface thing for the web version of the C64 version of the magazine. Actually emailed back and forth with the coder of the web version of Vice, a JavaScript implementation that originally was put on ice because nobody was using it. And I digged him down and I said, like, "Hey, we want to use this. Can you please unfreeze your project and continue with it?" And he actually did. So
Very cool. So the last 2 hours, we've really covered an amazing amount of ground. I feel like we could spend another 20 hours with all of the stories that you guys have accumulated over the last 20 years. But if I gave you each 30 seconds, say like your last word, if I gave you 30 seconds, what is the one thing that your time at Scene World you'll never forget? The one thing, other than the 5-year disc thing, Andrew. What is the one thing? And I'll let Martin start this one.
Well, for me, it's Scene World. It's you know, you're living, you're doing your thing, and if one issue of Scene World is coming up, then all the magic starts. And that's it. That is it for me. The work with the people, the work with all this we are covering. It's for me it's Gamescom, to be honest, because it's getting in contact with people face to face, not just over the internet like we are supposed to do these days. And it's the work with people nerding around. Yeah, that's Scene World for me. Yeah.
Andrew?
I would have to say, if there's one thing that Scene World has meant to me, is the friendships. You know, made several really good friends. I mean, Jörg has supported me through some difficult times. I just feel that there is this sort of almost worldwide friendship, and the world part of the name is there for a reason. It is about the whole world, how the whole world still uses and is still interested in the Commodore 64 and the old machines, and that's what it means to me.
All right, last word, Jörg.
Well, I guess the group effort is what it means to me. I mean, for example, last Gamescom, we had an interview with Hans Ippisch, who is working with Tommy Tellerico on the new Intellivision M ecosystem. And as a surprise, I said, like, okay, Victor, our Peruvian guy, come with us. And actually, it led into a contact between all of those people, and since then Victor is very active and motivated to work with us again and work on retro games. And if I can make people motivated to be more active again and to work with us more directly and tougher again, then I reached my goal, because I always wanted this to be a hobby project where we can all benefit from each other and doing some awesome stuff that nobody else dares to try.
Sounds perfect. So we're going to do this again in 20 years?
Yeah. Put it in your diary.
Well,
nice.
hopefully we are all still around. Yeah, why not?
Sounds good. I'm in. Call me. I'll do it. Guys, this has been a blast. I feel like I've learned things that I didn't even know I didn't know. Seriously, I mean, there's so much detail. The knowledge that you three possess about the Commodore scene is just phenomenal. And I know it's been accrued over so many years, and I know it comes from a love and passion for the hardware. I think all of you really boiled it down to what can best be expressed as a single word. It's a family, right? It's this group effort, it's community, but it's really family. I can tell, and I'm sure to those that are listening and to those that regularly read the magazine, I'm sure they feel very much connected and a part of that family. And to Andrew's point, it's worldwide. And I totally get the sense that, through your stories, that a lot of the love that goes into this comes right back from all the readers and listeners. So thank you for letting me be a part of your 20th anniversary.
Thanks
I feel very honored.
Us.
This was great. Thanks, guys. This was fun.
The first time we didn't do the interview, the podcast.
See? Makes it a little bit more interesting.
Cool.
Hopefully.
Very cool. Thanks, everybody.
Well, thanks a lot.